Welcome everybody to the Community Technical Assistance Center webinar series on family alignment. Today's webinar is on the first 30 days, assessment and goal setting, and that really is targeted to those first initial appointments that you have with families in children's services, where you really are doing assessment and diagnosis and setting the initial critical foundation for treatment with families. I'm joined today, hi everybody, my name is Lydia Franca. I'm a social worker. I'm part of the CTEC resource team. And I'm here today with Geraldine Burton, a longtime advocate and family support partner throughout the state that many of you may know. And I'm also joined by Yvette Kelly, licensed mental health counselor, also experienced in managing clinics and quality assurance, and has moved in and around the children's services world for quite some time. So we're very excited to be able to present to you today some core kind of best practices around those first 30 days. I did want to highlight, and I'll talk a little bit more about the series. If you received the email announcement, if you notice, this is going to be a series of about 6 webinars with at least 3 consultation webinars in between. And these first 2 webinars, the one today, the one next Wednesday, are really focusing on those first 30 days. And today's is on assessment and goal setting, and the second one will be on tracking progress and outcomes and discharge planning and preparation. And then after that, we'll have a consultation webinar where we'll be more about gathering information from you on how you've been able to apply some of these concepts in your work and really kind of problem solving with you around how best to do some of these things. So I want to just go ahead and get started. I did want to mention that everybody is muted. We're expecting a large number of participants. So there's a chat box on the right-hand side. And if you have any questions for us, please make sure to chat in and send to all panelists before you hit the send button. And there'll be a few times that we'll ask you to participate to kind of share your experiences, your thoughts, your suggestions. So we really encourage everybody to participate so we can get an understanding of who's on the webinar today. So it's a tall order to develop comprehensive treatment plans based on a thorough mental health assessment within 30 days. And I'm actually kind of hungry right now looking at that tall task. It is lunchtime, but I think the idea being is that we're asked to do a lot, and families are asked to do a lot in just those first 30 days of evaluation. And we really want to take a minute to kind of pick apart the different core components of those first 30 days and really spend some time talking to you about that today and in the next webinar. So the agenda we're going to focus on is why are the first 30 days important? What makes it a critical foundation for treatment? What are the goals? What is it that you want to have or to have happen at the end of those 30 days? And let's focus on some key core components that we've outlined as initial engagement with families, the clinical formulation and assessment process with families, and then the collaborative treatment planning and goal setting stage. And at the end, we're going to have some opportunity to answer some questions, but feel free to submit them in the chat box as we move along. And if we have a minute to be able to answer them, we will, or we'll hold them to the end if we don't. So why are the first 30 days important? What we know is that there's oftentimes a high dropout rate within those first 30 days. If that initial impression of the services for the family doesn't quite mesh with what they were expecting, or if they didn't feel safe or in an environment in which they were comfortable, oftentimes what you find is that people just don't come back. And I think there's a number out there that says the modal number of visits in kids services is about 1 and followed by 2. And so that really kind of sets the stage there for how well services are going to be with some of our families. So that initial appointment, that first contact and every contact is really important to think about how are we incorporating best practices in each one of those meetings. When clients leave, they don't keep it to themselves. That's another core message, is that initial impression that families receive, they take with them, and they share it in the community, and they share it with their friends, and they share it with the schools. So we want to kind of spend some time really thinking about what is the critical message that you want to share? What is it that you want people to say about the program? If clients discontinue early, they often return later with more serious difficulties, and that's also important, is that, you know, if we can kind of get services in early, we can kind of prevent some things from escalating. We can also help de-escalate, but oftentimes if they drop off and then come back later, oftentimes they're coming back with more serious issues that are going to be more challenging to attend to. And if we aren't successful in those first 30 days, the underuse and overuse of services is increased. And I think that should resonate probably with many of you in the sense that if we don't have a really solid foundation, then what happens is either you kind of don't have a clear focus of the services and people kind of languish and are on our roles in our caseloads for a very long time, or they drop off because there isn't a clear focus. So it can really kind of go either way. At the end of those first 30 days, what we would expect to see is an alignment with the practitioner, between the practitioner, clinical formulation, and caregivers' felt needs. In particular, I would add also the child's felt needs, especially if we're talking about older children or adolescents. We want to make sure that the following is accomplished, that there are shared goals or focus of treatment between the provider and the family, that there is a clear understanding of what treatment is and the role of each individual, the role of the caregiver, the child, and the therapist in order to make it a successful treatment, and that there's clear agreement, that there should be no confusion or misunderstanding, or that it should be very clear that everybody understands what their role is and what the focus of treatment will be. And that really, we're going to spend a lot of time really talking in a webinar today around how to ensure that these things are happening, how to communicate, how to have those discussions with families, even when they may not agree with some of the suggestions. The alignment model the first 30 days, and this is kind of a different sort of pictorial that we wanted to share with you. We like sharing visuals in a couple different ways as they may resonate with people in different ways as well. So the alignment, the idea is at the end of these 30 days, you have this shared goal and focus of treatment, and that it has these main components, that there's agreement with the child, that there's a collaborative treatment plan, that there's psychoeducation being provided that supports the collaborative treatment plan and the decision-making, that the roles are clear and that there's shared understanding. But first and foremost is a focus on strengths, and that's particularly important in that throughout all of this communication, if we can focus on strengths, we have somewhere to go. We build up from people's strengths, and we focus on the positive and what's going well in the families, not necessarily on the negative. And if we take that focus, it will oftentimes be much easier to engage families and services. We're going to spend some time here between myself and my co-presenters really kind of breaking down these core components. And I'm sure there's probably a couple other subcomponents in there, but I think we've kind of been able to say that in those first 30 days, you have to ensure that you're having initial engagement with families, that there's a clinical formulation and assessment process, and there's collaborative treatment planning and goal setting. So we're going to go into each one more specifically. And again, there's that chat box on the right-hand side. Feel free to kind of submit your comments, your suggestions, your questions, and just make sure to send to all panelists in the drop-down before you hit send. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jerry Burton to talk a bit about engagement.
Okay, so initial engagement is very, very crucial, and communicating with caregivers is key to engagement. Some of the practitioner core competencies are connecting with the family and caregivers, showing empathy, active and reflective listening, imparting critical information, problem solving around the barriers. Those things are very important. Then there's also felt needs. There could be dissatisfaction of some type. There could be distress, a catalyst, a problem. So those things are very important as well. Then there are barriers to using services. Is there an opportunity where there may be some scheduling conflicts? Are there transportation issues or other things that may be going on? And then there's psychoeducation, which is very important. So it's important for the provider to share with the caregiver what treatment really is, the role of the practitioner and the caregiver, and information about whatever the diagnosis may or may not be. And then, of course, transparency is very, very important as well. These are just some of the core best practices for working with caregivers. And some of you may already be doing this. However, it's good to get a refresher due to the changes that are coming down the pipe with managed care and that are in the works. So, what is the most crucial message to communicate to caregivers? This is something that we want you to chat about. What do you think are some of the most crucial messages? What is the most crucial message to communicate to caregivers? So if you could take the time and maybe chat about that.
So just as a reminder, the chat box is on the right-hand side towards the bottom. You can type in your responses in that blank space, and then make sure to, in the drop-down, to pick send to all panelists and then hit send, and that way we can see your responses.
Okay, so working in partnership, one of the things I would think would be working in partnership to help the treatment be successful, agencies being parent-friendly, and what do I mean by that? When the parent or caregiver comes into the agency, that they are received warmly, someone is there to help them. They don't have to wait a long time, even though we know that sometimes that can be the case. But it's important that agencies show that as well. And let me just, okay.
So there's a couple kind of responses coming in. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Somebody said the most critical message to communicate is that agency is ultimately here to help. We want them to recognize that it's a partnership.
Absolutely.
We want people to understand that we're here to help, that we're understanding and loyal, that it's important to communicate understanding, and that I'm here to support the parent to establish goals, that treatment is collaborative, and that therapy is a resource, something that helps them work through problems. So thank you, everybody, for submitting some of those messages. Please continue to keep chatting as we kind of move forward.
And those are very, very good suggestions. Thank you so much. So how do families describe what therapy is at your agency to other people, and what do we want them to say? So it's important that providers know what families feel about their agency, just as several people put on in the chat box about understanding and being loyal and working in partnership. Those are the things that we want them to say, but a lot of times we know that is not the case, and it's important that we do portray a family-friendly agency, be understanding, be empathetic, and be loyal, and work in partnership together. Again, thank you for those of you who did the chat box. So, how our processes may look and feel to parents. This is confusing to me, and I am a parent, but just think about a parent coming in and seeing something like this. So when we think about this, we're talking about when parents and caregivers come in, all the forms they have to fill out, assessments that they have to fill out without an understanding of what they are and why they are important. And a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is that these forms are just shoved at parents and caregivers and not explained, you know. So it's important that providers take the time to explain to them and help them, meet them where they are in the process. So moving forward, key components of initial engagement. So practitioner core competencies, are connecting, empathy, active and reflective listening, imparting crucial information. And these things are very important, and these are skills that providers should be using. Attending to felt needs, dissatisfaction, catalyst, problem, distress, barriers to using services, and we know that that happens a lot sometimes. Psychoeducation, what is treatment? Again, roles of the practitioner and the caregiver, information about the diagnosis, being transparent, making sure that it's a safe environment, identification, validation, and reinforcement of the caregiver's strengths. So it's important that these things happen because they promote a trusting relationship. We can't build on limitations. We need to build on strengths.
And I just want to highlight that in our webinar series on family alignment, About the third and the fourth webinar in the series is going to focus specifically on engagement. So we're going to go into a lot more detail around these during those webinars.
So, parent advocates and family support. Family support programs are available across New York State. Parent advocates, parent partners can provide a vital role in supporting and engaging the families and services. And this link is to the Families Together in New York State website, where they have regionally information in reference to the parent advocates and family advocates and parent partners who are able to support caregivers. These parent advocates and family partners have lived experience, and they've been doing this for quite a few years, and they are ready, willing, and able to assist and support families in their journey. So please, please check out this link to the website. Not only that, there's other information about other things as well. So aligning with families. Psychoeducation is a critical component across treatment approaches and diagnosis. And the key message to share, and these are relational type things, no fault problem, correct this idea, no right way for everyone. And a lot of times everybody is lumped together, and family support and working with families is an individualized thing. It's not one size fits all. No right way for everyone, same thing. You have to learn to do some self-care, taking care of yourself. Don't forget the positive. Reinforcement is a powerful tool, and together we can make real progress. So in other words, what is my role? Your role and the child's role. We are partners working together, and that is so very, very important to share that with caregivers and parents, that we are working together. I'm not here to tell you what to do. We are supposed to be working together on whatever it is that is happening within the family. And that change takes time. We live in a society where everything wants to be what we say microwavable. It's instantaneously. But this is a journey. This is a process. And so we have to be patient. And again, you have to meet the families where they are and help them through the journey. You're not alone. Your child's problems have been experienced by others. Absolutely. That's why it's important to utilize the services of parent partners and family advocates in this journey as well. Then there's dangerous situations need our immediate attention, self-harm and harm to others and property. And that's something that, you know, you have to let families know when they come in, that if there is a issue that comes up that involves dangerous situations, that, you know, if we have to, you know, call DSS or whoever or whatever, we need to call them, because it's about being safe. Ask questions. Important that we have a shared understanding. Again, very, very important. Important to reach out to and use your social support. Find out from families who else they can tap into social support. It could be a best friend. Sometimes it can be other teachers. I've heard families say their therapists. There could be the pastor, the priest, or, again, family advocates as well as social support. Be hopeful. We can develop a plan that can make things better. You have to have some type of hope in this situation, because things sometimes get worse before they get better. So being hopeful is something that can definitely help families.
So I just wanted to add that instilling hope was something that somebody had chatted in as a core message to communicate with families, and I think that's what Jerry's also saying here, is that these are key kind of messages to communicate that really focuses then on strengths, that creates that safe environment for families, that helps to empathize with them. I also want to know, I think some of you may not be able to see all of this slide. I did want to highlight that we also created a bit of a checklist that has those same messages. So for some reason you couldn't see it on the slides, Here is the checklist, and you can use the scroll bar if you don't see me scrolling and move it up and down yourself. But it's the same sort of core messages that Jerry just went through. You'll be able to have these resources, and the slides and the webinar recording will be posted on ctechny.com. They'll have that later as well.
So, building mental health literacy. Orientation to services, what the caregiver wants to know when they come into a clinic or an agency, and it's important that providers do this with the caregiver. So some of these things are, how does accessing services work at your agency? What are the services? What is therapy? Who will the family be seeing across the services? Because a lot of times when families first come in, they have to do an intake, so sometimes that person may or may not be the person that they're working with. Who do they contact with any questions or concerns? What resources are given to the family? What is the role of the therapist, the caregiver, and the child? Is all of this communicated to the family? And it's important that these things are communicated, even though, I mean, you know, sometimes for the first initial appointment, there may be some families who have been through this process before, but again, it's important that these things are shared with the families to let them know that they truly care about them and help them to, and to be supportive to them and helping them through the process of what they're going through.
I think, Jerry, you're making an important point. I think that a key point here is not to assume that people know what the process is. Or even if they've been in services before, don't assume. It may be very different from one place to the next. So that this should just, building that mental health literacy, mental health service literacy is really probably what it should say. It should be a core and sort of habitual component of those initial sessions to make sure that people really understand what they're walking into and how it works.
Absolutely. And again, some families may have, I mean, families talk to other families. So again, they already are on, some of them may be on the defensive about what happened with another family, and they may assume that it's going to happen to me. But everyone is different. That's why I said services are individualized. They are not one size fit all, and we have to remember that as well. Okay, so let's chat. What other messages should we communicate to families at the beginning of services? So if you can just chat in, as Lydia said, when you do,
so use that, so
use the chat box on the right, what's the left-hand side, right-hand side?
On the right-hand side, use the chat box,
yes.
And then just send to all panelists. So I think many of you have already been chatting with us, so I think everybody has the hang of it. So please go ahead and submit your responses. What other messages besides the ones we've communicated around core messages to families around building mental health literacy? Is there anything that you do maybe that we didn't mention, or something you found to be important to communicate in those initial appointments? So please go ahead and chat some of those in.
Okay, so we got one that says it's a process that takes time and collaboration with the parent. Absolutely. Okay. I encourage families to provide feedback through the process. For example, if we are working on a coping skill that is not effective, to bring it to my attention, because I'm aware that life takes place outside of my office. Very good.
Confidentiality is another key.
Absolutely.
There's a few questions coming in around the expectations for attendance, and communicating that. What do you think about that one, Jerry?
As far as attendance, I think that it should be communicated prior to, for the first visit, what the expectation is based upon what is happening with the family. So really, really important. Somebody else, to be realistic about expectations of the youth. They will not change overnight, to stick with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's
definitely.
a key core message, yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and so many of you have also incorporated chats around the treatment planning and discharge. So we're actually going to go into that a little bit more detail.
And I noticed really quick. I just want to say I noticed somebody said that discharge begins at the start. Very excellent, definitely, and that's something that's very, very important.
Thank you, everybody. Please keep submitting them.
Yeah. And I want to thank Jerry for really giving her perspective on really those key aspects of what parents are feeling and what are some of the things that we as providers can work on with families. And I think from the perspective of being a provider, we know that those are kind of foundational kind of strategies that we should be working. But sometimes there are things that due to regulatory requirements that kind of get in our way of doing that consistently. And so really want to talk about that process of being able to connect with families and to do that on a consistent basis. And so when we talk about that, let's take a few minutes to talk about what are some of the barriers in consistently ensuring alignment. I know through my work at the clinic, one of the top barriers that, often came across my desk was the time constraints. We're in a world where, everything is very fast-paced, that there's many demands placed on providers, and so sometimes it is a matter of I did not have the time to completely focus on, letting the family or individual know about, if they don't attend, or it took too much time to really explain, the services that we offer. So I kind of just, either assumed that they knew that or kind of went through it very quickly and did not check for understanding by the family. Also, sometimes we're always focused on kind of getting our agency protocol and completing our paperwork, making sure we get that done, which is very important because we know that the way that we get paid is by, submitting our paperwork. But is there a way that we could do that that is more client and family focused and friendly? And sometimes people are just not used to working in this way. So not used to being able to kind of make sure that their families understand kind of all that's involved, that giving them all of the information for them to make informed choices, and that's important, informed choices about treatment and what they want to participate in. I think sometimes we assume that, they're at our door, they're at our clinic, so they must want treatment, they must know what that's about, and as Jerry mentioned before, that's not always the case. So we really need to be diligent about making sure that we do that consistently. And just perspectives of the family may be skewed. We get a lot of, sometimes when we have new participants coming into our office, they generally come sometimes with referral information, with packets of information, maybe through years of connecting with other providers. And so we begin to kind of draw a picture in our head about, what we think the family is coming to us for, or what are the deficits and concerns that the family are coming with. And so we really make sure that we want to, not completely negate the information that we got, but really be able to put it on the back burner and really assess for whether or not that's the family's perspective of their situation. So we really want to be mindful of that. And ultimately, we just need to remember that people come first. And at times, that's going to force us to be creative in our approach to ensure that we meet the regulatory requirements while we're still being attentive to families. And that, the need to complete paperwork doesn't really trump the family's experience with our clinic. And so we want to just be mindful of that. So are there any other barriers that you have encountered in your doing this work? What are some of the things, if you can just, again, chat in, what are some of the barriers that you are up against in terms of being able to really spend time and build relationships with participants?
There's also, so I think the first chat question would be, are there any other barriers that maybe we didn't mention on the provider side? Because we spend a lot of time talking about family barriers, how can we think of sort of organizational barriers, and there's a few coming in. A large caseload is a factor.
Yeah.
Other members of the family may not agree, or agreement with services may not be together.
Yeah, and definitely, I think you guys are making some good points around that. And again, as I mentioned, your crisis gets in the way. We'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to treatment planning, and really just the stress of having to do this work at such a high, fast pace and be very efficient in doing it. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well.
So I think there's also, so I think some of you are really kind of highlighting sort of the provider end of the barriers. I think there are some coming in that are highlighting the family barriers. And we're going to spend some more time talking about family side barriers in our webinar and engagement. But I think if we can take a minute to kind of think through some of those provider barriers. So we have large caseload, high turnover are some that are coming in. Again, more caseloads, having to work with families that are mandated, and the challenges in collaborating with other systems was another one. You know, there's some specific kind of challenges to the work environment. Somebody also mentioned just the stress of the work environment as also contributing as a barrier on the provider end. So being mindful of these barriers, I think, is important. Then kind of taking some time to kind of think through if these are consistent barriers, you know, what are some things that we can do to overcome them? Somebody just also types in compassion fatigue and the stress, the burnout, that also becomes a barrier on the provider end.
Exactly. And so as Lydia said, what are some of the things that you have done to overcome some of the provider barriers that you have identified? What have been some creative solutions to that? You just take a few minutes to chat in, because oftentimes we struggle with, you know, this is the regulatory requirement. We are bound to do it, but are there other ways that we can kind of get the job done, knowing that, you know, that is going to be a struggle? So if you could tell me if there's some other things that you've done to overcome some of the barriers. Great. I see you asking coworkers for advice. Incorporating them into the intake process. Good. Supervision, that's excellent, that's great. Training, yes, so all these things, that's right, that's important. Someone said not to give up. Exactly. So to keep kind of trying to engage families. Case consultation, so yeah, so a lot of these things, and I see that supervision is there, and I think that's really important, because when you're working in this type of work, it is very essential to have great supervision, to be able to bounce, you know, to talk with someone to kind of bounce some of your ideas around with, and self-care strategies.
I think what's also interesting in the theme that's coming in is sort of the need for professional support, right? So the need for, whether it's support from the supervisor, whether it's support from coworkers. Somebody had asked about team building exercises across the staff. This idea of really kind of finding support within the workplace. It seems to be an important way to overcome some of these challenges, self-care strategies. But then I think there's another theme here in terms of other strategies to manage the paperwork, and there's a couple suggestions that have come in as well. For example, there was one that came in earlier that was talking about maybe try to see if you can have more members of the family present, so that the information gathering isn't coming from reading papers or reports or referrals, but it's coming from the connection and the communications you're having with the family. So simultaneously, you're gathering the information you need, but you're also building rapport. And so that's another kind of interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. So let's talk about what are some of the strategies that we can use to overcome some of these barriers. I think, again, I had kind of mentioned that sometimes it really forces you to be creative, but really change the emphasis on sessions to focus on how are you going to engage families? What is going to be your repertoire to learn how to really listen to families and work with them, all right, and build a relationship with families so that you're able to help them kind of meet their goal areas. Sometimes it may require that you revise agency protocols to incorporate these core concepts. So just because you've been doing something, you know, for the last 5 years doesn't mean it has to stay that way. You know, how are you onboarding your participants? How are they coming in the door? Are you utilizing folks at, you know, like front desk staff that are engaging? And so, you know, how are you informing clients or participants of you know, what does it mean to come to this clinic? What does it mean to be in therapy? So really taking a look at that. And again, seeing if it's really, you know, client-friendly and focused. You want to provide guides for providers to support inclusion of the concept. So there are some resources that we will review at the end of this as an example. And you want to structure supervision sessions to include practicing these concepts, role-playing, scenarios. So, you know, how are you going to engage a very difficult to engage client? You know, what does that mean? Can you practice that with a supervisor? Sometimes there's observation by a supervisor, and we actually recommend this for folks who are struggling in terms of engaging with clients, having a supervisor sit in and kind of point out, like, this is what I saw, this is what, you know, you could do differently, or these are some of the skills that you can employ, and this is what you did well. And really having the staff do a self-assessment of how they are engaging with families.
So I wanted to just highlight briefly is that we created a checklist based on today's webinar and also the next one next week called the Family Alignment First 30 Days Checklist that is a way to do that self-assessment. So if you're a clinician, you can kind of use this as a reminder of the different things we're talking about to ensure that you're really utilizing best clinical practices during those evaluation sessions. You can also use it as a little checklist post-evaluation. So after you complete a session, kind of go through this and see how well you did this with each family. Another way to think about it is if for the supervisors on the phone, can you also implement this with some of your staff? Can you talk about this in a staff meeting? Can you utilize this as part of your observation session? So what we wanted to do is really just create an easy resource that allows you to translate some of the information from the webinar and apply it. And then we hope in the consultation webinar in a couple weeks that we can also get some feedback from you on utilizing it and how you're going about implementing some of these concepts, these best practices.
All right, and so what are some of the key components to assessing families? Well, we know that there's a diagnosis. You know, how are we explaining that to our families? How is that coming across? You know, are we looking at the problem as the family sees it? So a lot of times, as I mentioned before, participants will come to your office and, you know, they will be referred from a variety of sources, and, you know, whoever they were referred by will have a perception of the issue or the problem, but are we checking in with the family? Are we making sure that that is the concern that they want to work on? Also looking at contextual factors. Well, you know, is there any recent family stress, any trauma, any community resources that we can utilize to assist the family, as well as strengths? And again, because a lot of us work in clinics, we're really kind of individual focused, but really there needs to be a way to assess, especially in your work with children, you know, assess the family. What's going on in the family, and how can you help them mitigate whatever issue that they're coming to you saying that they want assistance with? And strengths, always identifying what is, you know, what has the family done well? Well, you know, what are the things that they have done really well, and how can you use those strengths to mitigate some of what's going on in the context of helping them meet their goals? And so you want to establish a baseline assessment of the problem, severity, and the clinical focus for treatment. So knowing all that, how you're going to wrap that in a neat little package, help the family understand your assessment of what's going on, and then talk with them around treatment options. And what are some strategies for gathering information in which you can do it really kind of efficiently and still come away with all of the information that you need? You know, sometimes working with families, they're not the most verbal, as well as, you know, any family who's new to your agency or organization, sometimes it just is not so comfortable kind of coming in and just kind of letting all of the issues that they're up against kind of just flood out. And so that, again, it's relationship building, and it takes time. But make sure we're judicious in our questioning, all right? So, and make sure we're utilizing the information gathered. And again, as I mentioned before, you're utilizing that information and checking in and confirming with the family, you know, that they see it as such. What is their perception? Yes, the report says, you know, that, you know, you had difficulty parenting teens. All right, would you agree with that? Can you tell me a little bit more about your thoughts regarding that? to really making sure that we are confirming information. Because, again, a lot of these families come with very long histories. And so we want to make sure that we're just not, again, making judgments or jumping to assumptions about what's ailing the family. Again, be mindful of how difficult this may be for families, for them to, first of all, to even be at your agency asking for assistance or asking for help. That probably was pretty difficult for them. And then to have to show up and explain to a stranger about all of the stuff that's going on in their family and all of the things that are ailing them. So again, just be mindful of that and not really kind of short about, you know, can you answer this question? Can you answer this question? Can you tell me about all your trauma? Can you do? I mean, we really have to be mindful of that. And be creative in how you gather information. There's many different ways that you can gather information that is really not in kind of this linear kind of focus. And I'll use an example that I used in the field. A number of years ago when I was a new practitioner doing community-based work, I was told that I needed to complete an assessment again with some very stringent timelines. And so originally I started going into the family's home with my little clipboard and my little, you know, checklist with all of my questions saying, you know, can you tell me about this? Can you tell me about this? And then I'd leave there with the sheet in hand, and I realized that I really didn't understand what was going on. I had little bits and pieces of information, but I did not have the story. And so I had to kind of learn how to go in there and really kind of gather information in a rapid fashion that makes sense to me and conveys that I was listening to my family. And so one of the ways that I did that in terms of just trying to get the information in a very efficient fashion was a lot of my families, when I went into their home, they had things all over the house that told me a little bit about themselves. And lots of times they had pictures. And so I would just engage them in a conversation about, you know, tell me who's on your wall. Tell me who this picture is. And boy, did I walk away with tons and tons of information and from a historical perspective as well. And so I really took time to hear the story that they were trying to tell me, and I could go back and then write an assessment based on the story that I heard from the families and confirm their understanding of that. I see there's a question coming across, and I'll take a minute after this slide to just comment on some of those. Coordination of information gathering across providers. I've mentioned this time and time again. Depending on who referred the family, depending on where the family is, you'll get a variety of perspectives of the issues or concerns. And so one of the things that I do is, again, check in with the family, understand their perception, okay? And I always ask, is there anything else that I should know about your family? And I really want to know this question. I call it the lie in wait issues, because I don't want to be kind of blindsided by something that I should have known and really impacts treatment. For example, if a family was homeless and they arrived at my clinic and I was working on a whole bunch of other things, I'd want to know that, to incorporate that into the treatment so that their treatment wasn't derailed, so that later down the road I'd find out they couldn't make the session in part because they were homeless and I never took a minute to really ask the family a question relative to that. And then also encourage you know, participants to invite family advocates or people who they have trusting relationships with to the session. It really does help you gather information in a very distinct and quick fashion, and it also provides support for the individual who's showing up in your office. And so I see that there's a question here where it says, what do clinicians do when the family and the child have a totally different perspective on the presenting issue and what the problem is and what should be addressed? Really, that is where you have to really sit with them and really kind of help them negotiate how they see the problem. What I find is sometimes they're talking in two different languages, and so I have to do a little translation for them, but sometimes at the end of it, they might connect on one particular issue, and so they can come to agreement about that particular issue. And so that's a little legwork that you have to do as a provider in terms of really trying to understand what the issue is. And sometimes you have to translate it for each of the parties, you know, especially when it comes to adolescents and parents. Sometimes adolescents, you know, are saying one thing and the parent is really not understanding, so you really have to, again, listen and really try to understand from both perspectives and then help the family come to some middle ground. All right. So some of the things that we need to do is we need to promote alignment. We need to establish what the strengths are. We need to build on to address problems. You know, you use the strengths. You look at what the family has done well, you know, how they can tap into their internal strengths to help them, again, meet their goals. We need to move away from a problem focus. I always used to tell my therapist when I did supervision, be something to the family that no one else has been, right? So they've heard years and years about the things that they've done wrong. You know, won't you be that person who is strengths-based, who's hopeful, and allow them to kind of work to that. And again, you have to establish the baseline, and which assists with monitoring and assists with agreement of treatment focus, and assists with collaborative treatment planning and goal setting. And so once you have a diagnosis, you enter into an important clinical decision-making stage, which is treatment planning and goal setting, right? So what is most helpful to do this successfully, right?
And feel free to kind of chat in as we kind of move on with the slides around some strategies for collaborative treatment planning, make sure you're on that same page.
And deciding where to begin. There are some things that you need to tend to early on, which is safety and urgency, all right? But then the next you want to look at what is the most important factor bringing the family or child into treatment at this time from their perspective, right? What is it that has them arriving at your door? Focus on a problem area in which the family strengths can be utilized, and I spoke about that. What areas align with the felt need of the child, of the caregiver? What is it that they want to work on? And where are you likely to get an early win, all right? So what is that issue or problem that you can see can be mitigated really quickly, or that the family will agree on the issue and you can work on that right off the bat? And begin where you have the most information to develop a plan. This is so critical and important. I think you heard Jerry say it, is really sharing information about the illness, the diagnosis, the prognosis, and how do you plan to help them in terms of treatment planning. How do you plan to help them kind of overcome those issues? It's important for you to relay that to the family so that they can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to sign on to treatment. And we talk about collaborative treatment planning. You heard Jerry say this again before: transparency, consensus, and specificity. I can't say that word that great. I get tongue-tied on that word. But joint selection of high priority goals and treatments, and the selection of the discharge planning criteria, which again begins at the very first moment that you meet with the participant. And here's the collaboration wheel. Just looks at, if you look at the middle, I think the important thing to note here is that it's a shared vision, mission, power, resources, and goals. All right, that you are collaborating with the family to really identify goals, and that you're working with them, and that you're sharing resources, you're allowing choice, and you have empathy for that. So how do you create choice? Meet the families where they are. I know that sometimes families come in, they have a different perception of what the issue should be, but again, we need to gain an understanding from the family's perspective if we want to be able to assist them in kind of, meeting their goal areas. You want to inform the family of the resource and the options available to assist them in overcoming their difficulties. You want to inform them also of the limitations. Again, this may be around payment. This may be around attendance. You want to let them know that. Sometimes you need to give the family time to consider the pros and the cons to decide whether or not they would like to participate, all right? So they do, it kind of this is a choice. Here's what I can offer you based on what you've presented to me. Does it sound like it's something that you want to participate in? There is a choice there, and we have to make sure that we let families know that. And again, if there's a limitation around legal considerations and things, we want to inform them of that, but we also want to give them the option to participate or not participate if they so choose so, and we want to support them in their decision and offer to connect them with any other services if they decide that your services is not the service for them.
So I just wanted to mention very briefly this joint selection of goals, and this is just one example. There's so many ways, and there's only so much you can put on a slide. But, you know, you can start out with that presenting problem. But one way to think about is, you know, posing to the caregiver the question, what do you need to help with your child's behavior? At the same time, what does the child need to help with his behavior? And then what are 2 things you'd like to work on together with your child when you're talking to the caregiver? And what are 2 things you as the child would like to change or work on as well? And then it's that consensus building where you can kind of focus on a collaborative treatment plan and focus and a shared understanding of what we can work on together so that your child and you are feeling a little better throughout the day and so that you feel heard and respected. And I think that's a key message. I'm going to, at the end of the webinar, show you a couple other handouts that we've created to help guide you in some of this process. Joint selection of treatments, I think Yvette did a great job of really kind of beginning to talk about this. I want to highlight that there's NREP at Addenda is a great resource for lists of evidence-based treatments, and you can search it, and it rates each treatment model by quality of research as well as quality of training and dissemination. And that's really one approach, and there's also this common elements approach. But the idea thinking is, really outlining what is the best evidence in treatment options for each of the diagnoses, and are we informing families of that and giving them the option to choose. What I also wanted to highlight briefly is that it's particularly important to do all the different aspects that we've just spent some time talking about well, so that you end with a true, clear focus of treatment. Because if you don't have that clear focus, what ends up happening is you spend a lot of time dealing with cows, or you face a herd of cows, which is the idea there is a crisis of the week. And then it's easy for us, if we don't have a clear focus, to then just focus on dealing with a crisis every week, and then we never actually get to the true heart of the issue and never get to really seeing sort of continued progress and improvement. We're just putting out fires. So just wanted to highlight the critical importance of having that shared focus of treatment. Now, we wanted to spend just 2 minutes highlighting this for you. Yvette will be role-playing as a provider, Jerry as a parent, about what would a conversation of some of these core components look like. And what we have here is that if you can briefly kind of give the context and then role-play it out for a couple of minutes. In that time, please chat in any questions or feedback that you have that we'll answer soon after the role-play.
So I'm going to be meeting with Jerry, who is a parent that was referred by her child's school because the child is disruptive in the classroom. And she's extremely frustrated because she doesn't see these behaviors in the home, and she gets numerous phone calls from the schools on a daily basis saying, your child did this, or to come pick them up. And so she has come to me on the recommendation of the school, but she's really not sold on the fact that her child has an issue, and that's because, again, she doesn't see it in the home. So I'm going to start. And this is going to be our second meeting. I've met her once. She's given me some information. So I'm going to try to do this in a very succinct fashion. But good morning, Jerry. I just want to say, I just want to kind of go over the reason that you arrived at the clinic, just to ensure that I kind of understand your concerns and that I got it right. But over the last few weeks, you've been told by your child's school that he's struggling with some behavioral problems, mostly just unable to follow directives. And that oftentimes he needs to be redirected. And because of these issues, the school continues to call you on a daily basis. And at this point, it's gotten to the point where it's impacting your ability to work. And so it's really concerning. So you came here because you were referred by the school to come here. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So based on the concerns that you reported, I spoke with you, had an opportunity to touch base with the school. It seems that your son may be suffering from ADHD. Are you familiar with that term?
Is that when kids are like jumping all over the place and like what they call hyper?
Yeah, that's a little piece of it. ADHD is a condition in which kids may have difficulty waiting his or her turn, act impulsively, struggle to follow directions, and I think the whole gamut of that is that ultimately makes it very difficult for them to be successful at school. And so what are your thoughts about that diagnosis, the ADHD? What are your thoughts in relation to your child?
Well, that's what the school says, and I don't agree because my child is extremely smart. He's not crazy, and I don't want him to be labeled. He does his homework, and he's just excited about what he's learning in school.
Mm-hmm. So let me say that I appreciate your honesty in voicing your disagreement about what I just said, and so I can see that you have really strong feelings about how your child is being labeled. So I just want to take a moment to hear more about your concerns regarding this.
I really don't like the way in which kids are labeled by doctors and schools and made to take medication. Once kids are labeled, schools or sometimes want to place them in special ed, and I don't believe that that is right for my son.
Okay. I can understand how you might not be comfortable or even agree with having a label placed on your child. But before we decide whether or not this diagnosis seems appropriate, let me just tell you a little bit more about ADHD. So it's a diagnosis that affects children of all different backgrounds and learning abilities. And having this diagnosis does not mean that your child is not bright or smart. In fact, many people who suffer from this diagnosis lead very successful lives. It does mean, however, that sometimes because of the inattentiveness, they may not be getting everything that they need out of school, and so it may cause them to not get all of the information, which at times helps, contributes to, again, them having some difficulty in school. So in terms of treatment, I would recommend that we work together to develop some behavioral management strategies that will assist you in helping your son gain more self-control. We'll try a number of them, see how they work. We'll talk with the teacher to see if they'd be able to report back on some of the interventions that we use, and let us know how it's working, and decide from there whether or not that plan is actually a good plan or a not plan. It generally takes about 12 weeks of meeting for an hour each week. So is that something that you think would be doable for you?
It would depend on the time. It sounds doable. However, my son goes to after school, and he can't miss a lot of days, or else he'll lose his spot in after school.
Okay. Well, the clinic has evening hours, so if we were able to work around your son's after-school schedule, do you think you'd be able to participate?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you foresee any barriers that might prevent you from being able to participate, like child care for other children, transportation?
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Okay, and if those things come up during the course of treatment, just make sure you let me know and we'll work through it then, okay, because I'd rather not see you miss anything at that point.
Okay, all right, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry and Yvette. So we went through a kind of very brief example of a communication between a provider and a parent around kind of understanding the illness and setting some initial kind of plans for services. So I haven't gotten any questions that have come in, and I think we've answered some of the ones that have come in. So if there's any sort of remaining question out there, please go ahead and submit it now as I continue to kind of just wrap up our webinar. So we covered a lot of information. There is a part 2 to this next Wednesday, 12 to 1, so please register for that to hear a little bit more about sort of tracking progress and discharge planning and all that, which is a continuation of this one as well, and that we really kind of highlight each of these core components of the alignment model with a major focus on strengths. Collaboration is key, and what I wanted to also say is that I think there's some of you, as we can see from the chatting, that for some of you this information necessarily isn't new, but I think the key here is and the question to ask ourselves and our staff and our colleagues is, are we doing it consistently? And what is that message that parents would say? What would parents tell their friends and their family when they leave the clinic? And would they agree? So the question here is, how can we then start ensuring that we are utilizing best practices consistently? And as the system change that we're all facing in the next year or two really starts taking place, especially around managed care, it's going to be particularly important to be able to document these best practices. It's going to be particularly important to be able to highlight that you're able to do this on a regular basis in order really to get the authorizations that you need to continue services. So in this series, I want to highlight that the part 2 is next Wednesday, February 11th, 12 to 1. Please check your emails and sign up for that one. The consultation webinar will be for the consultation webinar for this part of our series will be Wednesday, February 18th, 12 to 1. And what we recommend is for everyone to take a look at that checklist. It'll be posted on our ctacny.com website. Bring it back to your offices. Really kind of think through how to utilize this and really kind of just process, is there any area that we aren't doing consistently? Is there any area that needs improvement? Because what we'd like to do is talk with you in that consultation webinar for those who are interested and would like some additional support about how to go about utilizing this more consistently. I also wanted to highlight that we're going to have a couple other handouts, like this example from the vet on what services are offered at the Child Mental Health Center. This was given to practitioners to be able to share this information in a succinct way with families, and we'll have that available for you. We've also created a collaborative decision-making tree of some of the pieces that Yvette talked about and just making sure that you have a shared understanding. And we also have a few handouts specific to the most common diagnoses with kids, and we're going to have that. And this is something that was created with parents in mind. So please, these are things you can print out and share as you're kind of providing psychoeducation around the illness with families. I don't see any additional questions coming in, so I'm just going to highlight that these are our emails. Feel free to contact us directly. Also, feel free to check our website at ctechny.com. I did just get one question, are they available in other languages? Currently, they're available in English. You're welcome to kind of download them and translate them, but I think we will consider, especially if there's interest, is making sure that they are translated into other languages. Thank you so much for that feedback. At the end of the webinar, there's a feedback survey that will pop up. Please complete that. Let us know if you'd like some additional information, additional resources, and thank you so much for participating with us today. Have a great day.